As we've discussed in previous videos, learning happens when students are able to select what's relevant from the new information presented to them, mentally organize it into something that makes sense, and integrate it with their prior knowledge. Generative activities are activities that learners do during or after the multimedia lesson to help them do all of this more effectively. There are 8 kinds of generative activities that researchers have looked into, all of which are effective in promoting learning, although some come with important caveats to keep in mind. Summarizing means doing a written or verbal summary of the material after the lesson. It's a bit like note-taking, except students are asked not just to take notes to help them remember, but to summarize what makes sense to them. Although most studies show that summarizing is effective, it doesn't benefit students with high prior knowledge as much. Also, the students in these studies were all in college. One study done with 6th graders showed summarizing not being effective, suggesting that students, especially younger ones, might need more guidance on how to summarize productively. Mapping involves creating a visual representation of the key terms and concepts from a lesson, such as completing a graphic organizer or making a concept map. Students did not seem to benefit from filling out graphic organizers if they're not giving some guidance ahead of time. However, when they were given scaffolding and more simplified interactive graphic organizers, where the mapping process is made easier, they performed a lot better. Even elementary school students benefited from interactive graphic organizers, which you can find now in websites or applications like Visme, Canva, Vue, MindNode, and many others. Drawing is when students are asked to illustrate something based on the content. Studies show an overall support for drawing across different age groups and content areas, especially when students are given guidance and support on what to draw, such as giving them a background and showing them the parts to include. Imagining is similar to drawing, except that students are asked to create a mental image of what they're learning about, without drawing it out. Students did well when they're given a specific prompt. They also benefited from being asked to imagine from a first-person perspective. For example, when learning about how blood circulates, students who were asked to imagine in terms of their own body did better than those who were asked to imagine blood circulation in another person, although both were still beneficial to learning. But without specific prompts, students who imagined in the first person still did well, but not those asked to imagine from a third-person perspective. Self-testing is when students are asked to test themselves on the learning material right after seeing it. Johnson and Mayer compared 3 groups. The control group watched the learning material twice. Another group had to write an explanation after watching the material, and the other had to answer 2 transfer questions after watching the material. Their study showed that students who answered transfer questions did better in a delayed transfer test that involved new questions. They also showed that asking students to answer only retention questions, that is, questions that only test what they remembered, did not help them do better than the control group in transfer tests. Self-explaining is when students have to write explanations or elaborations after they've watched the material, as a way to reflect on what they've learned. For example, students in the self-explaining group were asked to pick from a menu of choices why they answered in a certain way. The self-explaining group outperformed the control group. However, if they were asked to type up their explanations, their performance went down, possibly because typing out adds a level of distraction to the learning process. Teaching involved asking students to teach someone else what they've just learned. If you're a teacher, you might have done this in your own class and found it effective. In studies, students who were asked to create a video teaching the lesson performed better, with effect sizes ranging from 0.55 to 0.82. The last generative activity is enacting, in which students were asked to act out the lesson using objects. For example, elementary school math students were asked to move a bunny along a number line to act out the operations involved. Enacting worked better for the academically stronger students than they did for the weaker ones, likely because enacting itself can be cognitively taxing. Studies done with older students also show benefits to enacting as well. A meta-analysis of these generative activities indicate an overall benefit to using them in multimedia learning. However, learners, especially younger ones, should be given guidance and prompts. Otherwise, these activities might have a counterproductive effect. You're likely to have used some of these generative activities yourself as learners, and if you're a teacher, adding some of these to your lessons could be beneficial if they're properly implemented.